what in the world is that word I've mentioned? Cosmogonical, meaning that they describe how order came out of chaos at the beginning of time. There are several creation myths in the Vedas. We'll look at the two that characterize the philosophical and reverent demeanor of the Vedas, respectively.
At first there was neither being nor non-being. There was not air nor yet sky beyond. What was it wrapping? Where? In whose protection? Was water there, unfathomable and deep? There was no depth then, nor yet depth listening. Of night or day, there was not any sign. The one breathed without breath by its own impulse. Other than that, there was nothing else at all.
Darkness was there, all wrapped around by darkness, but all was water in the stream. Then that which was hidden by the void, that one, emerging, stirring through the power of ardor, Papas came to be.
In the beginning, love, arose, which was the primal germ cell of the mind. The seers, searching in their hearts with wisdom, discovered the connection of being and rising.
The crosswise line kept being from non-being. What was described above it but below. Bearers of seed there were, and mighty forces thrust from below and forward moved above.
Who really knows? Who can presume to tell it? When was it born? Whence issued the creation? Even the gods came after its emergence. And then who can tell from whence it came to be?
That out of which creation has arisen, whether it held it firm or it could not, he who surveys it in the highest heaven, he surely knows, or maybe he knows not. Our next creation story comes through the gods and foreshadows the devotional direction of yoga and interconnection between religion and social structures. In it, we watch the god sacrifice Purusha, cosmic man, from Purusha, king the Varna, the major classes or crafts of Hindu society, the sun and moon, and the elemental deities.
Everybody's reading kind of a paragraph. You want to pass over it? You can take it from.
When they divided up the man, into how many parts did they divide him? What did his mouth become? What his arms? What are his legs called? What his feet?
His mouth became the Brahman, but his arms became the warrior prince. His legs, the common man he called his trade. The lowly serf was born from his feet. The moon was born from his mind. The sun came to being from his eye. From his mouth came Indra and Agni. While from his breath the wind was born. With the sacrifice, the gods sacrificed to the sacrifice. Those were the established rites. These powers ascended up to heaven, where dwell the ancient gods and other kings.
Besides illustrating the creative power of the gods, we see here how deeply rooted the caste system was in Indian tradition, with the four main varnas delineated in the oldest of texts. Those four castes are the Brahmins or priests, the Kshatriya, the warriors, the Vaishya or merchants, the Shudra or servant class. Even below the Shudra were outcasts, the untouchables. The caste system shaped the Indian experience for millennia before it was constitutionally abolished in 1950.
So a couple creation hymns. The second one we just finished reminds us of our conversation on the caste system. And what you're seeing here is the hymn that created the caste system. As every child might ask, why am I the merchant class? Where did this class come from? You can just imagine the questions of children as they wonder, as they wonder about why they're in a caste. And so a parent might easily simply read this hymn again and let them know where their caste came from. It comes from creation. And so the creation hymn gives you that answer that is the final answer. And so that's a lovely way of responding to those questions that we all have. Where did we come from? Why am I here? And why am I in the position I'm in?
I read something just today mentioning the caste system. There's a book over in the library on Hinduism, on Krishna, but it's in the children's section, so it's a children's book. And the way they talk about the caste system there was that it was created by the English, and that what they had before that was Varnas. And the British apparently added the outcast, that bottom caste, which they didn't like. Now, whoever wrote this book, maybe that was their take on it, but they wanted to blame the English for the badness of the caste system. So,
well, I think it was kind of interesting in here, the Brahmin. You think about the head and the arms and everything, and in this one it was the mouth. You think more of the brain or the whatever, but it was the mouth. That's different.
And we'll discover in Hinduism the reverence for the sound. And so it's the sound that you're making, not necessarily the words that you're saying. And that's why it was so nice to hear Virginia's voice in the sense of her sound in the meditation. And as we did the mantra, to hear the sound of it. And then in wonderful form, she modulated the sounds as she was going through, and we all got a chance to listen to the sound. And so it's sound as much as intellectual capacity that is very much a part of Hindu practice. Lynette asked a question, and I realized I didn't answer it while I was editing my number 2 lecture. And her question was, "What's that?" And I never answered it. And so who would like to help me with that?
It's a symbol that means life, essentially.
Okay. Life.
Is the sound of the universe.
There you go. Okay. Another way of defining it is that's the Om. And so as we were using that, and Virginia just used it as, I think your definition was the universal sound. Was that the definition? The universal, representing the universe as well. So again, if it's universal, then everything we say about it is encompassed well within it. And so that's the Om, our first sound of the mantra we use today. And so that's a fascinating representation, and it means to someone who has a pendant, if they know what it means, it usually means, Om or Hinduism, or I suppose it could also include lots of meanings.
It kind of looks like a guy running with his arm and his hand, and kind of feet running.
I somewhere read a description that, and I can't remember which was which, but there was 3 parts of it, and one part was the wakefulness of your mind, being aware and awake. Another part was like the dreaming mind or your subconscious, and then the third part was somehow beyond the 2, the union or the fusion of your entire consciousness.
Excellent. And I think if it's a universal sound, there will be much conversation on what it means. And so the challenge of Hinduism is everyone's got a voice. And so all of those elements are there. We're going to come back to it once we get to our devotional conversation, because the Om is a very, very profound part of the devotional life within Hinduism. So we'll come back to it with some additional thoughts on the topic.
One note, the definition of life came from that same children's book I read.
Oh, it is. Okay, you saw that one. Oh, that sounds wonderful.
There you go.
So what you're also telling us is the library is improving in its diversity in McCall.
What you find apparently in Hinduism is no 2 people are going to give you the same answer about anything. So that's, you're over there.
And please know that that's part of this class. Your background will give you insight into Hinduism in some way. And it could be the opposite of what I say. and that's just fine. And so that's sort of the challenge of Hinduism, is recognizing the dichotomies that are natural in Hinduism. And so we will begin those right now in a lot of ways, because you may have seen them already in the first creation story, but it's designed to embrace the dichotomies of life. And so that we're going to come back to. But if you look at the first creation story, I want you to look specifically at its second paragraph. There was no death then, nor yet deathlessness. Of night or day there was not any sign. The one breathed without breath. Okay? That's what I want you to focus on right now. The one. And there, what is also encompassed there is the own. Another definition for the own is the one, the universal, that which is all. When we talk in that language, we tend to talk within what I'll give you as a technical term of monism. Monism is oneness. Monism is oneness. Now that compares to our conversation last time with Mark, who, for those of you that are new, isn't here tonight. He's a chiropractor. I hear he's book signing in Chicago tonight. So he's having quite a time, and we appreciate his contribution. He wanted to talk about duality. Okay? Duality. And does anyone remember what duality is?
Right or wrong, evil or good. Masculine, feminine.
Okay? Right, wrong, evil, good. Physically, you begin to see it a little deeper. And that now goes to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th paragraph. The minute you invoke the words, even the gods came after its emergence. That word alone points to the duality of the gods, and I'm going to put it in brackets because some folks are monotheists, meaning one God. Here we have polytheists with the plurality of the gods being indicated. But what's that in contradistinction to? The minute you invoke the gods, what's the duality to the gods? Mortals. So you have the immortal and the mortal. And so this particular language is very, very much a part of Hinduism. Is it the one that we see in this creation hymn, or is it the gods, and by extension, the gods and human beings, as in a duality? We use duality simply as teachers to explain things. If we simply said it's all one, that means the answer to every question is the one. The one. The one. You remember when your kids, and I don't know if some of you went to churches or spiritual gatherings, and the answer to every question is God does it. God did it. God knows. God is aware. It's God. Those answers are true, but they're not terribly helpful. And so from a sense of trying to describe what is oneness, we're instantly trapped as human beings into breaking it into parts. And those parts now begin to go to the dualities. The obvious question that is, why is mom different than dad? You can hear that in the question of children around the campfire. Why is mom different than dad? Well, because that's the way we were created. Mom is different than dad. But together, they make you. And so that oneness is immediate in the creation story as much as it's part of our lives. That it takes a male and a female to create a new creation. And that story is the story of campfires as long as we've been human beings. As people try and understand and define things that are offered to them. Does that make sense, folks?
Mm-hmm.
Does that give you a sense of our difficulty tonight? Our difficulty and challenge when it's going to come to thinking about the realms of meaning within Hinduism. We're going to get lost in this all night. Now, and there's what's three? What's the classic name of three entities in the Godhead? If polytheism is many gods, what are three gods? Pardon? Trinity. There you go. And so there's Trinity. So Trinity or tritheism is a move that some religious traditions have made. Can you think of one that has used tritheism or Trinity to define their understanding of God? Catholicism uses tritheism or Trinity. But then they make an interesting move. Because tritheism, a Catholic would never say that they're a tritheist.
Mm-mm.
What would they define themselves to be?
Monotheism.
They would define the three as one.
Mm-hmm.
So you see how that religious tradition struggled with their sacred literature saying, we've got a God, we've got Jesus, and we've got a Holy Spirit, and they all seem to be three gods in one.
But it's still duality.
So, but they would argue the oneness is oneness and is complete.
Yeah, but it's still God and man. You know, they're including Jesus, but they're not saying Jesus is us. They're saying Jesus is God or part of God.
And the definition of Jesus is he is both God and man. And so they use duality to try and create a definition that is incredibly complicated. And yet it solves the problem. Is Jesus God or is Jesus man? And so the doctrine would say both. But in Christian doctrine, Trinitarian only succeeds because they drive it back to monism. But you understand, if you have a Christian background as well, that this is a really, really challenging topic that your intellectuals and those that enjoy these conversations have struggled with. Does that make sense? It's right here in the hymn. We're going to come back to that a bunch of times tonight as we go through this. I'd like to sort of give you my sense of who I am. And I call my ethic a complementary ethic. And I use that definition to try and struggle with this stuff and these dualities and singularities. Can any of you think of a complement? Maybe I'll get to that in a little bit. I'm going to define the problem this way. We tend to find truth and then protect it. Truth. 1 + 1 is 2. Does anyone want to have any struggles with that as a truth statement if you're in the typical structure that we live in our society? 1 + 1 = 2. And on base 10, for those of you that are mathematicians, as long as you don't change base on me, you will resolve that problem of 1 and 1 = 2. Is everyone comfortable that's true?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
One thing is it was only proved within the last century. So before that, it was a definition that they would just define 1 + 1 = 2, and nobody had proof of it.
Okay.
Interesting.
But we do have
We
the
do
recent
now.
proof.
We do now have a
Thank
proof
you.
of it, yeah.
The challenge as we come to these issues is that others tend to find the opposite truth and then protect it. Let's use our original argument. If you are someone that believes in oneness, that is true. There is oneness. You can look at everything that is and say that is one. Is anybody want to not argue that that's not true? No, that's true. Everything is one. We are all a part of the oneness of everything. Okay? But then the first person that went, male and female, duality. That's true. Male, female,
Oh, opposite.
true. Opposites. That's true too. And so we tend to find truth and protect it. Monism. Others tend to find the opposite truth. Duality. And then protect it. If you're to define the strains of yoga, there are 4 predominant strains in yoga, particularly arriving out of Hinduism. And again, I'm referencing this text. It's from Vedas to Vinyasa. And she very nicely talks about the 4 major strains of yoga. Well, how does she divide them? Well, 2 of them are monism, and 2 of them are dualities. And so her definitions of them are this break that we're seeing right here in the major strains of yoga. And so this is what has caused the breaks in the yoga universe as to whether it's a duality or whether it's a monism. And so human beings do this naturally. They find truth and they protect it. And if someone comes up with a different truth, now you've got a fight on your hands. And you can think, if you were to think of within any of the religious traditions, but to think of Buddhism. Buddhism within religious traditions has I can easily think of 4 major traditions. There are liberal traditions, and there are conservative traditions. There's the Tibetan tradition, which is different again. And there's the American tradition. There's a myriad of traditions. Now, you can easily say, mine is true. The one I'm in is true. Yours is false. And so it's easy to make that jump. And over humanity, we have done that over and over and over again. Within Christianity, Catholicism, one strain of Christianity. We then had Protestantism, a different strain. And they define themselves as opposites. You believe this, we believe the opposite. Therefore, we fight. And for 500 years, they've been fighting aggressively to say, my strain of belief systems is correct, and the opposite is happening in these belief strains. What is the challenge of our day is that statement. What happens if both are true and yet opposite? What if monism is the bringing together of opposites? And then all of a sudden you see right and wrong, good and evil, masculine, feminine, God, mortality. You realize that there's a truth there. That which is opposite now does have something to say to each other. Just as a battery has something to say on the positive and negative side of the battery. They are opposite, but then used to create on a flashlight light. One of the great physics problems is what is light? And Isaac Newton said light was a particle. Bang, 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 and it hits your eye. After a trillion bang, bang, bangs, those particles hit your eye. And that was Newton. Not too long after Newton, from the Netherlands, he said, no, it's a wave. It has no mass whatsoever. But Newton knew that whatever was banging along, hit your eye, have mass to it. The next guy said, no, wave is light is a wave with no mass. There's nothing there. It's just a wave. And every 100 years or so, someone would come along and find the truth of light. And it would be the opposite to the previous 100 years. Well, we've been messing around with that until Einstein and Bohr had this in what they called a deep truth. They're both right. And when you measure it, we later find out, that's what creates the truth. When you look at it, when you assess it. And so truth it has meaning, but deep truth tries to figure out dualities and place them side by side. So we try and find that. And so that becomes the challenge of what I've been trying to deal with, is how in the world Do I live with the conservatives and the liberals of every tradition? How do I live with a 500-year war where we've had belief systems that are struggling? How do we deal with Christian and Hindus, where time moves historically with the past and the future, and time moves cyclically, repeating year after year? What happens if they're both true? And I think as intellectuals, we've got to come to that point of saying, okay, we've been talking about how one tradition is historical and one tradition is cyclical. What happens if we just say they're both true? And we have to deal with putting them together. And we have to realize that when we measure the history, we get a timeline. And when we measure the cycle, we get the cyclical event. And that somehow allows us to handle these ideas that we're already talking about in this class. Okay, tough stuff. How you doing?
Seem to be, when you think about the cyclical and the timeline, most of us would probably be more comfortable with cyclical if we didn't have to move forward in age and get older. You'd be happy just to kind of, okay, now we're going to celebrate this every year at this time and celebrate.
Kind of like Logan's Run. You just want to be a certain age and pop,
boom,
bang,
you're
bang,
done.
again.
But yeah, it's just kind of a, the linear thing is the scary stuff.
Yeah.
Because there is no comfort without repetition in something. You know what's going to happen if you celebrate Christmas or whatever you celebrate. That you can build on it, but it comes around every 365 days. And there's a comfort in that. And sometimes it gets to be a bit of a drag, but the real challenge is moving forward. And the fear comes from moving in a linear fashion.
Well, I think with the drag when he's Buddhist, that guy there, he didn't like the idea of eternal, and I think that was because in the Hindu world it's eternal. You keep incarnating eternally, forever.
So he wasn't comfortable.
And well, Buddha gave you the idea that you can escape that.
Mm-hmm.
But he also said that there's no escape. I asked him where do you go next when you escape samsara, or can you choose to come back to this life after you completely enlighten yourself? And he said that there was no escape, right? He just said that
He introduced you to the Bodhisattva, which is the almost Buddha. And I don't know if you caught that idea. Do you remember that one? And so that's something that we'll be focusing in on in Buddhism, is what's the almost Buddha? And it's the person that's attained enlightenment but chooses to stay in the world and do good to others. So the Bodhisattva tradition is a wonderful tradition of what other traditions would call a saint, someone that achieves incredible good, that seems to transcend all likelihood of what a faith can accomplish, of what a belief system, of what a community of spirituality can accomplish. And they go to these great lengths. And you ask, well, how'd they get there? Well, they enlightened but chose to stay. And that was what I was hearing, and I didn't know if you had heard the terms before, so that you caught his definition.
I remember that.
Okay.
You talking about that, but so the only difference between like Bodhisattva and like a Buddha is making the choice to stay on Earth instead of
Instead of transcending. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the distinction, and it helps explain those kinds
How
of
can a
things.
Buddha be a true Buddha if you choose to just be like, well, fuck you, I'm out?
Well, and that's what the Buddha didn't do.
Figure it out for yourself.
He became enlightened, and then he stayed, and he taught his disciples. He could have just transcended. He chose not to.
Oh, I see.
So you use the story of the Buddha to really sort of give you the illustration of the Bodhisattva that's still the Buddha. But eventually he died. And at that point of death, then that's said, well, what happens next? Well, he's enlightened. And so he's now not a part of this world. And so now you have the explanation that can fit in that he is enlightened, but he has not stayed in samsara. He is truly enlightened because he's dead. So it just gives you that rationale of what do we do with the very, very good person that does wonderful things.
I remember reading in one book, I think it was in like Theravada, Buddhist book, that being human was the most privileged position, or the best life form to take for learning the Dharma, and that the temptation was, once you became a deity or a god, you would basically use up all of your good karma. You would be in this heaven bliss, and for thousands of lifetimes, but eventually you would start to deteriorate, and even gods would die as well, and go back to the hell realms, or being an animal or a germ or some other life form, and work your way up to evolving again. But being a human was, you had just enough suffering and just enough bliss in your life. It was like this balanced position where you could really learn the Dharma and also teach and spread it throughout the world, because you have an actual body, and God's. It was kind of like a trap, too good or too bad, but being a human is somewhere like right in the middle.
The middle path. That's the story of Buddha. I heard he came back to his friends who were all fasting, and he'd stopped fasting, and they were like, but they could see that he was enlightened, and he said it's the middle way.
So the complementary worldview that I'd like to encourage you to think about is recognizing that one person's worldview may be the opposite of another person's worldview, and they are one complementary worldview. I'm a scientist by training, originally a scientist, and I met Lynette while I was studying genetics at the University of Orange. And so your genetics teaches you very quickly what a complement is. And if you recall your genetics lecture, A and T and C and G are the complements of every strand of DNA in your body. It's that complement, and it splits apart and then comes back, and then it's reframed and redeveloped. And so that complementary is very comfortable to me in genetics. I've given you a little inclination of how physics is trying to deal with deep truth. Biology, sociology, politics, the other disciplines that demand that you see complements. And so religion, spirituality, and ethics needs to see them too, so that when we encounter someone with a completely different worldview, we look at them as a friend instead of an enemy. So that when we do this, we see diversity and distinction, and we see bonding as opposed to war and disruption. And so there's a worldview here that I think is calling for us, that's essential to who we are. And I'd like to bring it into the realms of spirituality, theology, as we've seen here, ethics and spirituality. And so that's sort of my way of thinking of it. And I call it the complementary world. Okay? I'll build on that. I don't want to sit there, but I want you to sort of take some of the problems of dichotomy of two things that are different, trying to live side by side is a dichotomy. And so that's some terminology that I've already used, which I didn't define, but I'm trying to define it. And I'm trying to say there's lots of illustrations, so that now as I go into this, Hinduism makes sense as to some who will be monistic and some who will be dualists. And the dualists will erupt with their God language. Okay? And they're going to just sit side by side as we develop it. And so when you ask what is sacred to a Hindu, you really can come up with three answers. You can come up with Brahman. Now, that should be confusing when I say that. Why should it be confusing? What have we already talked about as Brahmins?
For the upper class.
That's your top caste
Creator God
of the caste system. Okay, now I've thrown in Brahman as my first term of what is sacred. Just know, it's just going to get more confusing, so hang on to your seats. So we're going to see three elements of three major areas. We're going to see Brahman is going to be one of them. We're going to see God and goddesses, and we're going to see Dharma. Those are the three sacred areas that we're going to look at. And so Brahman is a designation for, there it is, the real. So now what we saw in our creation hymn, you could also use Brahman, and you're saying the same thing. So what you're saying is monism. Okay? So when you see Brahman, the designation for the real, one villages in India translated that creation hymn, and when they saw the real, the word that came to them was Brahman. Now, so that's an assumed lineage, but I think it merits some sense of reality, just to try and place it. And so this designation of the one, and that's the ground of the universe. But here's the incredible jump for Hindus. My true self, me, deep within me. And the Hindu name that they'll use is the Atman. So make sure you've got your vocabulary beside you. Everyone should have a vocabulary sheet. Go to your vocabulary sheet and look at it and go, the Atman. What's the Atman? Okay, definition. The Atman, what is deep within me, is identical with the Brahman. Okay. So now you get the entire Eastern sense of where do you go looking for the sacred deep within you. But what are you looking for? My true self. Some Christian traditions, speaking of Orthodox Christianity, they will say, I am God. Now that's a huge jump. Now that's closer in my mind to this than the distinction that came out of the Western Church that really was trying to say the mortal is in the image of God. And image is usually explained as a mirror image. And a mirror image is opposite. Your mirror image is opposite to who you are. But that's the image of God. You're opposite and yet you're one. So they tend to use that kind of thinking. But the Orthodox tradition pushed it much harder and said, no, humans are God. And they can be the divine. And so in some intellectual traditions, you're going to get uniformity, which is here. But the difference between the Christian and the Western traditions and the Eastern, if I can use those very bad terms, because you know that East is West and West is East. So just understand the dichotomy, dualism of East and West. It's just an explanation. But the Eastern thinking is this is where you go look. Why? Because that's what's inside of you. Socrates, in the Western tradition, when asked where should I go look for what is most important, said the same thing. You should go and look in your soul. So the Greek term of the soul has its origins in this identical concept. That which is truly yours is deep within you. The dilemma everyone knows, and if you think onion here, you have to peel off the crud of life before you'll get to the kernel of the soul and the truth that is already within you. Within Hindu thought, you do not come with a blank slate. You come with all the lives that have contributed to who you are. But the problem is you don't know it because life has been putting this onion shell around you of all the crud of living your life. So the key is going to be to get rid of all the layers so that you can get to the true you, the true self, the Atman that is deep within you. Okay? So there is your first exposure to the Atman. There is your recognition that that's what you're searching for, that which is truly within you. And that makes you a very valuable creation. You have the greatest, you have the entire universe within you. All you have to do is go find it. Okay? Is that making sense, folks? Is that making sense? So, what's the way out of samsara? This is a path of knowledge, is knowing your real Atman. And thus knowing Brahman means moksha, liberation from the cycle caused by ignorance, desire, and boatloads of bad karma. Okay? So what's the path here? The path is knowledge. If you know your real self, you know Brahman. If you know Brahman, you're free. You are free. And that liberation is what is the great goal. Okay? Can I move on? Okay. And so there's your monism right there. Well, what's going to come next? You now know. Here comes the dualities. So the dualities are coming next. The god or the goddess is sacred. Now, why should you have a goddess? Many of us come from a Christian context. We may not be Christian, but you come from a Christian context. And in a Christian context, you only get God, right? Within Hindu thinking, you get goddess. Why should there be a goddess if there's a god?
Well, there's men and women, so
There
that
you go.
only makes sense.
There you go. If on the earth, in that plane, you have men and women, then on the divine plane, you have to have a god and a goddess. Otherwise, you couldn't have a human plane. Because in ancient thought, the divine plane is a mirror. Now I'm going to go the other way. The human plane is a mirror of the divine plane. And whatever's happening in the divinities is what's happening in the human plane. And if there's a war on earth, there's a war in heaven. And so there's a duality runs in all directions in this kind of thinking. If you have humanity, you must have divinity. And the divinity mirrors, I'll say it again, the humanity mirrors the divinity. But they're different and they're divided, but in essence they're the same. So for there to be a god, there must be a goddess by extension. How did Catholic thought work their way out of this problem?
Brought in Mary.
They had to elevate Mary to the virtual equivalence of a goddess. And then they solved the problem. Okay? Now, everybody who's a good theologian will say, no, Mary is just an amazing woman. It's the most amazing woman that's ever lived. She's not God. But that's a funky conversation really quickly when you walk into a Catholic church and you see the veneration of Mary. You just sort of, you have to take a step or two back because she is being highly venerated within the Catholic orbit. And so you have to ask, is Mary sacred? Well, from the natural reality of how theology is built, you have to answer that question, yes. And so it's a real problem for Christian theology. And so our dilemma goes back to the thousands of villages. All of the thousands of villages only had one deity that they venerated. The problem was when somebody put a camera above all of India, they saw boatloads of deities. In fact, there's 3,340 deities within Hinduism, of which 33 are named. Okay, I mean there are boatloads, and that number is specific in my text here, and I'm close.
That was more like 300,000.
But she chose to give me the 3,300 text. But I would like to say there's one for every village in India, just to give this some content, just so that each village in their own development venerated a deity, and that deity had a name, and that name was very much a part, because each family will have a personal deity. And in the community, there could be diversity of those deities, especially in the large cities. But you have one selected as a personal God. But we have the problem of knowing that there's at least 3,000, if not 300,000 deities within Hinduism. What do we do with all that? Is this a crazy pantheistic problem? No, because each person has an individual deity that they venerate. Okay, so that's our problem, not an adherent of Hinduism. They don't have that problem. But there I did put it down. That's from my text here. There's 3,339 deities, of which 33 are named. I'm sorry, I didn't even have my notes up to date on that one. I enjoyed that number, but Brett's not wrong. There's probably 300.
Like I said, you talk to one Hindu, you get one answer. You talk to somebody else, you get a different answer.
Okay. And so there's three types of personal theistic Hindus. And so now we can break it even a little more. And why is 3 important? I mean, that's part of the numerology. Why is 3 a crucial number? We saw it here.
The sacred.
Why are we seeing it here? It's the number of
Sacred.
the sacred. Okay? Within ancient numerology, the divine is always best described in 3s. How is the human plane defined? Take your compass. It's always 4, and you know that's perfect because 3 plus 4 equals 7. Okay? And why will so many have 12 disciples? And why would so many religious traditions go crazy if they didn't have 12 disciples? Somebody do the math.
3 times 4.
3 times 4 is 12, so that also is a perfect number. So here's your number of perfection, it's 7. And then when you magnify that, that's 7, 7, 7s. That's the perfection of perfection, because it's 3, divinity, perfected, which is your 7s. And so when you really want to achieve perfection, it's not 7, but it's 3 times 7. And that's just your numerology functioning here. So you're always looking, and look at this, folks. Just look at this. And what's 9? 3 times 3. So really, all of this, so why did I stop? Why would I be comfortable with this illustration by this author? Because it's in perfect 3s. So I could be completely comfortable with this number. It's the number of divinity magnified many times. Does that make sense, folks, how we sort of test the ancient thought? We look at its numerology, and that helps us. So we have 3 types of personal. We have great God Vishnu. Lord Vishnu is depicted in dark blue or black. His avatars appear in other colors. Normally, he's depicted with 4 arms. One arm holds a locust, a second holds a conch, the third holds a discus, which always returns by itself after being thrown. And the fourth carries the mace. The petal of the lotus are believed to symbolize the unfolding of creation. The conch is said to symbolize that from which all existence originates. And the discus and the mace reputedly were obtained by Lord Vishnu as rewards for defeating the god Indra. Where did you see Indra? The creation story. The god Indra. Lord Vishnu is said to possess also a special sword called the Daka and a special bow called Saranga. His wife is goddess Lakshmi, also known as Shri, goddess of beauty and fortune. He rides a huge creature, half bird and half man. There's your duality, called Gandhara. His home is in heaven, called Vaikuntha, where the Ganges River is believed to flow from its source at Vishnu's feet. The god has 1,000 names, the repetition of which is regarded as an act of devotion. Okay, so Vishnu, highest of lords, transcending the cycles of samsara, evolving worlds of his own essence, but still a deity, a personal theistic deity. Then there's great God Shiva, great Lord of all, the ultimate one. Okay, well that's going to be how he's defined by those who personally venerate great God Shiva. What's our problem here?
Vishnu is the highest lord.
I thought Vishnu was the highest lord.
Yeah.
Okay, and go to the previous name. I thought Brahman, which is a derivation of Brahma, and that's monism. How can we be a god and yet create oneness? There you go. There's the God, personal, creating oneness in the development. The ultimate reality is best experienced by Shiva and his Shakti, the feminine side. So again, they're handling that God-goddess problem very nicely within this arrangement. It encompasses all dualities, male and female, good and evil. Okay, so how do we get oneness and our dualities? Now you're seeing how this train of thought organizes it. And this is the Lord of Yoga, folks. Okay, there's your Lord of Yoga, is Shiva. Okay, now looking at that. So there's your,
Very feminine.
and yet with a, and how do you sense that?
Pink flower.
Pink flower.
Mm-hmm. Hands are very feminine. And arm muscles are feminine.
Okay.
Even the face, I would say,
Mhm.
has feminine characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And the bodice gives
Oh,
you
yeah,
a sense of
there's a bit of a-
confusion, I promise you.
Yeah.
There's a sense of confusion there. Okay, so how do you represent the duality of male and female, which is important, and the monism of full creation? Okay. And then here's yoga. There's that doorway into yoga, is Shiva. And so by studying Shiva, then that's going to give you your doorway. Shiva, and so Shiva, it also continues with this third, and that's Ganesha. Ganesha is the elephant head on Ganesha's body, the god of prosperity and great fortune. You'll see Ganesha everywhere. And so, how's my timing here? I probably need to take a break.
Yeah, it's supposed to be something like that.
I'm probably over. But here's Ganesha. I'll just take my slide. And I think I'm still holding. Who's missing? Thank you. And so here's Shiva is often portrayed as bringing fierce destruction because of a quick temper and outrageous behavior. Sexually attracted to Parvati, god over the mountains, he marries her and then practices asceticism and refuses to impregnate her. Parvati has a son, Ganesha, born from the dirt she removed from her body while bathing. Ganesha guards the bathhouse, but one day Shiva forces his way in and, enraged that Ganesha tried to stop him, cuts off Ganesha's head with a mighty blow. Parvati's anger now threatens to destroy the world, so Shiva agrees to restore Ganesha's life, taking the head of the first living thing that came by, an elephant, and places this on Ganesha's body. This is the origin of the extremely popular elephant-headed god Ganesha, worshipped as a bringer of prosperity and good fortune. So there's the story of Ganesha. But then you look, and all of these pictures are so intricate, and you sort of say, well, why is this, and why is this, and why is this, and why is this, and why is this? And so when the mother gets that question, look at how she answered. Mom, why does he have large ears? So you will listen more. Why does he have an axe? So you will cut your unhealthy attachments. Why does he have a broken tusk? So that you will sacrifice for good cause. Why does he have a big belly? To cultivate contentment. Digest both good and bad experiences. Why does he have a big head? Think big. Why does he have small eyes? Concentration. Why does he have a rope? To remove obstacles. Why does he have a small mouth? To talk less. Why does he have a trunk? For immense strength and fine discrimination. Why does he have a sweet bowl? For the rewards of the good life. Why is there a mouse in the picture? Desire. Ride on it. To control. You see how these are just moral stories? Every picture in Hinduism has this wonderful moral story that has flowed from that picture. So that's Ganesha. Comments on Ganesha? Anybody have a Ganesha in their house? Do you? You have one? What do you think when you see it?
My friend gave it to me for a gift, but I couldn't really go here, so I just think of her.
Okay. Does it work?
Yeah.
See? Comments? Shiva, Lord of Yoga, Ganesha, good fortune.
I also have a Shiva, but I didn't know that Shiva was the Lord of Yoga.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? So the third one is the great goddess Sita, mother and destroyer. Now within Hindu thought, this is one of many female goddesses. And so female, powerful, active, all creative powers derive. And in the realm of duality, we better have all destructive as well. Do you know women? Are they a collision of duality, creativity, and destruction? Would that be a wonderful duality definition of women? How are we doing here? If I said anything overtly sexist, that has put me into deep trouble.
That's really very, very much used, especially in the Hollywood realm of the same thing. Very creative people that are very powerful, that destroy people and relationships around them big time. I mean, they have really tagged, there's a serious realm of an identity to certain types of women that are given that meaning.
And being divas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There you go. Very dirty. Okay, so Hinduism has not forgotten women. It can't. Hinduism is the same 50-50 relationship of all humanity. And has done a very good job of creating women goddesses so that women have someone that is representative for them. A great struggle within Western American thought is the lack of female divine templates. Now those are growing. Can you think of some that are now growing within the American orbit of spirituality? The largest female goddess within America? There is one. Yeah, she has had to replace it. She's had to fill that void of women exemplars. But Wiccan is built on Gaia. Gaia is a female goddess. And so your entire Wiccan tradition is built on that perception, a very quickly growing religious tradition within America. And it's built on this premise that it's a goddess that we venerate as opposed to a male god. And one of the interesting things is feminist thought to be distinct. Feminist thought is deeply woven into oneness. So when you look at the American intellectual tradition and you get into women's thought in ways that in some cases we call feminist thought, you will find that they are highly organized around oneness, unity. Because males have been pretty focused on this side for a pretty long time, haven't they? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when a culture does this, it's a counterweight to whatever's happening. And males classically have focused on duality, because duality has created power. And power, by knowing the duality of God and humanity, and if you can control God, you're controlling all of humanity. And that control has been the driving force of the priestly tradition in all religious traditions. So the women, particularly within America and Europe, have focused on philosophical thinking that focuses, you could say, existentialism, which has had great contribution by women, is focusing on oneness.
In Wicca, there's a trinity too, though.
Okay.
The maiden, mother, and throne.
Okay.
So.
Excellent. Thank you. And so they encompass lots of complexity, don't they? Thank you for that. Okay, so if you're wondering why the cow wanders around India, seemingly at will, the cow represents Sacred Mother to many within India's religious traditions. And that Sacred Mother deserves veneration. And we've already talked about how reincarnation could open that door to saying that may be someone that I know. That could be part of my family, therefore I need to venerate it on that basis. But if you're recognizing the God structure, you would also venerate it on that basis. So not only from a human perspective does it deserve veneration, but also from a divine perspective does it deserve veneration. Okay? Could be a good place to stop. Conversation that's erupting. Don't mean to not give you a conversational moment on anything you're experiencing or thinking. And I'd also like to drive this to yoga. What does yoga have to do with all of this? How is the spiritual? We've discovered Shakti tonight, but how does yoga itself? So let's just take a moment and just process a lot of what we've been experiencing before I push on. How is yoga very much a part of everything we've seen? If you look at any image, it's going to be probably in a yoga posture. Why? Why? What have you discovered that deserves some highlight right now?
Well, the Atman is, I mean, your true self, your inner self, and I feel like when you're doing yoga, you know, one of your purposes could be to touch that true self. So.
And how does it physically do that, as well as spiritually? How does it spiritually do that, and how does it physically do that? Can you just, from all of our conversation, what's happening?
When it happens, you'll know it. Put it that way.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, because that's the driving question. How in the world does yoga accomplish all of these ideas that we're talking about tonight? And it does. It's the representative image of all of these ideas and all the divines and all of the oneness elements. They're all will be easily represented in a yoga posture.
Kind of simplifies it a little bit, or it just sums it up anyway, maybe. Because it's a lot of stuff.
Or maybe, I mean, you're mirroring or mimicking the gods, or embodying them when you use the poses, I guess. I'm not sure how to say that.
So the posture itself will allow you to be an individual, right? The posture will allow you to be an individual, and yet you're almost always in community. So you're going to get some interesting, I mean, often, but the posture itself and all the representation tonight really focuses on the individual, because it's within the individual that you discover the secret that each and every one of these elements are striving to find. So the posture itself allows you to be the one and to be the being here, and then to drive you to non-being, to where you're letting that go. You're letting that go, and you're discovering within you what is not outward, but what is inward. So the posture gives you that chance of physically being in one place for quite a long time. And because you're in one place, you're not having the rest of the world that you're engaging with. And so that mouse, that desire that you're trying to ride, you don't have to worry about it when you're in posture. You don't have to worry about the desire of the next thing that you will be encountering. It won't as easily come to you when you're in yoga posture as too easily you will encounter it if you're walking and talking and engaging.
And another thing, it's a tool set, so it's not all doing one thing. So depending on what the instructor gives you, say like they want to connect you to who you are, so you can figure out who you are. There's a certain set of postures they can run you through, and because I've had this happen to me, and then all of a sudden you don't realize that it's happening, maybe a few hours later, the next day or something like that, and then you don't even realize it's happening when it's happening, and you look back and, oh my gosh, was the result of that. And it's amazing stuff. I mean, can't tell you how it works exactly, but it does. It totally does.
Go back to Virginia's metaphor of the mountain within hers. What was clearly her meditation trying to do within you? Maybe not clearly, but let's just sort of put it out on the table. It was really trying to accomplish some wonderful work in you. What was it?
Grounded.
Grounded.
You feel peace.
Yeah. Yeah. And did it succeed for you in the moments you allowed it? It did for me. Felt good. Grounded. And that sense of strength, the metaphor of the stone, that which is in you is solid. Because as you walked in, you've been living the fluidity of your life, and the issues and the people and the problems and all the chaos of life. And then all of a sudden, the meditation gave you this wonderful grounding of where you could rest. And when you're on solid ground, you can rest from the fluidity and the chaos of life and the suffering and the problems that you encounter. And so it has this wonderful sense of doing that. And knowing yourself, the breathing, just that knowledge of yourself. That first instance of what's inside the breath, because again, we've discovered what's the breath tonight. The breath in the mouth is that's the Brahman, that top caste, the caste that can access the spirituality easiest. Why? Because their entire life is designed to access spirituality. And so that casting representing even just in the breath itself. So you can take apart all those elements and you can enjoy looking at them. Other comments?
I did want to mention, since we're on the female slide, Shakti, the feminine side of the god Shiva, is also known as power. That is the god's power. And so the feminine side of the god is the power, like say the god's up in heaven, he's not really doing anything directly on the planet. Any power that comes to the planet comes through the Shakti, comes through the feminine side. And then in another way, if you look at Krishna and his an early consort of Krishna, it was Radha. And Radha is sort of like married to Krishna. They weren't actually married, but they think of it that way. And so, Hindu men might come together and say, Radha, Radha? And they'll say, yeah. And what they're saying is they're married to God. That even though they're male or whatever, they're taking the female, marrying this divine force of God. And it's, anyway, so it's like,
Very nice.
yeah.
You're just loading us all up on these dualities, aren't you? Okay. Can I move on here? Got a few more minutes, but I'm wanting this to be conversation as much as I'm wanting it to be data dumping. So, okay? Because the last one is Dharma. Okay. So what is sacred? Dharma. And so, in here, the eternal Dharma, that oneness, the eternal Dharma is the entire cosmic order, eternal reality, the eternal order of things to be followed. Okay, well, how do we get there? And now we break it into parts. And so the foundation of Dharma and Karma. And so the law of karma we've already talked about, the unfailing action, result from every action. And so karma, and so karma. And then we're dealing with following our dharma. Now the definition of dharma is living in accordance with reality. Anybody want to sort of jump ahead and how should we live according to reality, which means living according to our dharma? Anybody want to take a quick guess what dharma means?
The way.
And what way should you be living?
Like compassion.
Okay, there's going to be some of that. But in Buddhism made the jump to that. And the reason they had to make the jump is that Dharma is the caste system. So you live according to Dharma when you're living in your present caste and your conditions, because that's all come to you as a result of past karma, and you're living a contented life in that class and caste. That's living your Dharma in Hinduism. And Buddhism had to chuck the caste system and replace it with something else, which now will be renamed Dharma again in Buddhism. So you're going to have to keep those things in a recognition of what's happening as we shift from Hinduism to Buddhism, and also your own awareness of what Buddhism is. So it's crucial that you catch the Dharma in Hinduism is the caste system, and you are expected to live it because you're here because of karma. You are in the caste you're in because of what has gone on in the past. And then you've been codifying that your whole existence anyway. So the next element of Hinduism is bhakti, which is love and devotion to the personal God. And so by devoting yourself and venerating to your personal God, now you're living that key part of Dharma. And Dharma also includes the path of knowledge, from where the Upanishads, which we've already been exposed to. And then you'd want to be aware of Advaita, and that's the path of non-duality. So you've got to figure out, because the only way you're going to be enlightened is if you get to the oneness of enlightenment. So how do you get to the oneness of enlightenment? You've really got to transcend the duality, because the duality is very much life on this earth. You've got to transcend that and move to oneness. And so you're getting a sense of what enlightenment is right here. You're getting a sense that ability to say, you're male and you're female and I'm male. I've got to get past that and say we're one. That's an important element of enlightenment. We are 8 separate people, 9 separate people in the room. What are we? We are one community. Do you see how enlightenment comes from that transcendence? You have to move from the non-duality to begin to approach enlightenment. Enlightenment is that wonderful sense of oneness, that approaching that. Are you catching it?
Which is why we've got a huge problem in Congress.
Because of the duality.
They're just completely right down the middle. I mean, they're not even trying. You know?
They would rather live in the truth of their duality than in the oneness of democracy and what democracy means. If we could use all of our conversations to sort of explain in our simplistic way what's horribly happening in tribalism. So what's tribalism?
My tribe versus your tribe.
Mine versus yours. My truth versus your truth. I will fight you for my truth, even if I appreciate you've got truth, but it's the wrong truth. I will live in my duality, and that will create war. So why did our feminist thought go to monism? Because it was desperately trying to break out of the power struggles of duality so that it could find oneness in unity. And why does it take women to do that? Because that's what so many women easily do, is create oneness out of all the chaos of diversity. And so it's just a classic way we achieve that. And so Advaita is the path of non-duality, and Atman, or Atman, same word, is the real self. So how do I get to moksha? There's my pathway of Hinduism right there. And through Atman, I will attain moksha, which is the transcendence of all of this. Okay? It's a lot of stuff, folks. Okay? Dharma imposes the present class and conditions. Okay. So quickly, human nature, we've already seen it. The world is here. It functions by the eternal Dharma, that the gods work to keep it going. Humans have the duty to contribute to its welfare. There is the creation of the one reality. The whole universe evolves from this one reality. It's a cyclical process of creation and destruction. Creation and destruction, this is fun. 4.3 billion years. I thought that was neat. But then, you have a reversal until Vishnu alone remains. Whoever came up with that theory was an adherent of Vishnu. So what are we learning? The existence in this world, what is our place? We have to distinguish between our empiric self, our physical body, and our real self, the Atman. The Atman is eternal and formless, the true self. It's embodied in the workings of karma. So we have to figure out our karma. And that ultimate goal is moksha, which is a liberation from samsara. Okay. That's enough for tonight. Fault loads. So, when I go through a slide like that, did every word make sense? Now, there's a test for you. Was there any of those words that you really want to work on again? The goal, seek moksha, which is liberation from samsara. Get that from karma. We're searching for our Atman. I dumped Hindu words on you, and that could be total gibberish unless we've done a good job of setting the setting of each of those words. How we doing?
It makes sense when we have the vocab sheet for it.
Okay.